Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, thanks to Victoria's, Weaver, and Ben for inviting us. It's to me a real pleasure to be here, and more because I'm an outsider somehow, so thank you. Well, I would like to start just introducing a little bit our team. We are a small network of people. We are Ishan Shapiro, who is the guy who is here in the laptop. Can you hear him? 1 second. Someone can help me. Can you hear him? Or? Yeah, okay. Oh, well, Ishan is the guy who, yeah, with the keyboard in the front of the face. Yeah. So, well, we are Ishan Shapiro. I am Diego González, and we are with Vasilis Kostakis, the founders of Bitmind.co. Bitmind.co is still a... Oh, man. It's okay. Well, this guy is Ishan. So, well, Bitmind.co is still a young project. So we are still in an early stage of development. I'm doing preliminary research. And so we are looking for collaborators and opening our perspective. So we would like to introduce it just as a simple seed, which is part of a higher ecosystem. An ecosystem that we define as basically as a network of networks, a network of agents that are trying to bootstrap their cognitive capacities and to scale their cognition, their collective intelligence, by developing shared understanding, shared infrastructures, while co-producing common value, social value and economic value. So just to give you some examples about this network of networks, we are collaborating and doing things together with different organizations, companies, projects, and communities, basically networks. For example, Sensorica, which is oriented to the development of open hardware, and basically sensors, and they are based on Canada, but they have nodes all around the world. MetaMaps, which is more oriented to collaboration and sense-making and innovation. And Backfeed, which is exploring the potential of blockchain technologies, blockchain-powered technologies, to provide standards for self-organization and coordination in a decentralized way. So basically, each one of these networks has its own nature and its own characteristics, but basically, we have in common hands-on exploration of new ways for self-organization in distributed and online communities. So we have in common also that we are part of an emergent model of economic production, which is called commons-based peer production, a concept which will be described properly and deeply later on by Ishan, if I'm right, so I won't go deep. And just to give you a little bit of context, even though Ben has already said some of these things, but even though we are not explicitly working in the AGI field, we are not artificial general intelligence researchers, but we also have asked ourselves several times about the nature of intelligence, if intelligence is a process of becoming, in the line of what you have already said. So I, in fact, did my master in artificial intelligence, and I had some relation with applied research in narrow AI. But what we are really doing in the Bitmind.co project, it's more about a manual, a living exploration of collective intelligence. So we are becoming the nodes, we are becoming the neurons of a higher network, and we are trying to explore what we can produce together in the sense of intelligence as a wide concept. So basically, the model we are going to present here today, it's about real, actual implementations of networks of people, also open to artificial agents, rather than an algorithmic implementation of intelligence. So we are really working on the development and the building process of these super networks of collective intelligence. So we are a bunch of individuals with different backgrounds, putting together assets, resources, and effort and work in order to co-produce common value. And we conceive value in the wide sense of the word, because value can be described maybe as digital property in tokens, like in cryptocurrencies, or maybe in some other kind of economic value, social value. So it's a context to explore maybe deeper in another context. So, well, just basically to summarize, This model is growing in real communities of people distributed around the world, which self-organize and develop their collective intelligence without the need of a priori goals, no? But rather with the interconnected tissue of common values and interoperable infrastructure. So we are not trying to solve problems. We are not problem-solving oriented, but rather we are just doing something in order to see what happens, no? And basically what we are doing, it's moving from an old way of organization in value production communities, which was traditionally more centralized with central nodes controlling and filtering the movement, the flows of the value, and competing to each other. And rather we are trying to draft a distributed and heterogeneous scenario in which the peer-to-peer approach is the key. No? We are exploring this dynamic and continuous adaptation of the agents and their network itself to co-produce value together. So Ishan, can you speak? We are going to try if you are in or not. Can you say something?
Yeah, sure. Everyone, can you hear me? Am I coming through clear?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, great. What we're really talking about here are groups of agents, whether those be individuals, organizations, or communities, with particular value, particular capacities and skill sets who are coming together and converging around constantly shifting shared intentions, shared values, aims, or meaning, or passion. And this can emerge from collaborative dialogue and conversations. They're sharing resources and knowledge, and they're producing assets, toolkits, platforms, and knowledge collaboratively without ad hoc or without a priori hierarchies and structures. So what occurs in these networks of people in these communities is a more ad hoc hierarchy or structure, because we do need a certain amount of control, and it's useful to have that hierarchy to get things done, but we want those where we want them. We don't want those to persist necessarily. There's a lot of challenges in doing this in communities. First, people are complex. Ideation and collaboration is complex. Governance, there's a lot of work to do around governance, legal structure, how we make decisions within these communities, and specifically on different projects or in different spheres of activity. And this gives rise to pretty highly diverse modes of operation. So what I'm going to do first is introduce us to a few concepts that can help us orient ourselves within this space. The first one that Diego mentioned earlier is commons-based peer production. Now, commons-based peer production is an emergent field of study around open source communities. Right now, it's actually under study from the Horizons 2020 program in Europe. And there's hundreds of these communities who are developing open source software, open source hardware, but also they are the source of new initiatives and ventures. Sometimes these are projects that really need resources and support to scale their actions. And commons-based peer production is looking at the ways in which they create sustainable models or thrivable models, really. The next concept that we have here are decentralized autonomous organizations or corporations. This is something that's emerged in the last couple of years with the emergence of blockchain 2.0 technologies. So what this is they're looking at decentralized networks of narrow AI autonomous agents, which perform an output maximizing production function, which divides its labor into tasks that either the agent can handle, the intelligent agent can handle, or that humans can also do. So what's really interesting about these is that, first of all, the legal or regulatory structure around decentralized autonomous organizations does not exist. And what they're looking at is within the blockchain, which is basically a distributed database. That's the foundation of Bitcoin and similar technologies. You're able to write what are called smart contracts. Smart contracts are if-then rules around, okay, they can act almost as an escrow agent, right? So if agent delivers this, then deliver this value to agent Y. So this is really interesting because decentralized autonomous organizations given these smart contracts can basically operate themselves, and they can create value. One example of this would be, I mean, we know that there's so many algorithms for stock trading, etc. But what if we actually were able to write in rules about what those, what those agents were able to do with the value that they made doing that? So that's another one. But there's another new emergent model that's come out in the last year or so, which is distributed collaborative organizations. This basically melds those two in some ways. It proposes that it's a form of organization with characteristics that include primary governance and operations that are conducted via a distributed network, the blockchain. And this enables stakeholders to be afforded with a more active and democratic role in the management and operation of the organization. I'll go into how this sort of works a little bit later. And finally, this is what we've been exploring, what we're presenting to you today, is the open value network model. This is an approach to commons-based peer production that allows individuals and organizations to co-create and aggregate value through lateral and large-scale coordination, cooperation, and collaboration, to serve as a responsible steward of commonly held wealth and assets, to account inputs and outcomes within a common ledger system, and to distribute value equitably and intentionally within and beyond the network, to share returns amongst the contributors and the creators of value, hopefully in proportion to their contributions. So we can skip ahead to, I'll hand it back over actually to Diego. He'll lead you through this next part.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. 1 second, I'm taking the microphone again. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Well, can you hear me now? Yeah. Well, the question that rises after this is that, why do we need the open value network model? Why do we need another model if we already have the commons-based pre-production approach and so many different ways to develop common value in online? Well, the thing is that the open value network model has emerged for something, because we needed to solve key problems in peer-to-peer communities, in the open source or the commons-based pre-production communities. And to solve these problems, the open value network model provides scalable coordination infrastructures, basically to increase the cognitive capacities of these communities of value producers. There's a sentence which summarizes accurately the problem that we already have in the open source world, which basically says, in addition to the issue of fair distribution of wealth, open source communities do not have the proper organization structure to foster long-term retention of members. The result is a high turnover and a lack of loyalty that could limit the growth of the open source model. Basically, the idea which is behind this sentence is that even though the commons-based pre-production approach has a bunch of powerful advantages, for example, it provides open access to knowledge, it preserves the ownership of common value, and it enforces both freedom and equality with a global and transnational impact, so it carries a lot of social value. Even though all these advantages, it already has several disadvantages. For example, it doesn't have a fair distribution of revenue mechanism, a lack of proper legal structure, and also it has a lack of financial sustainability. Just to give you a short example, if you take the case of a crowdfunding project in which different agents are putting money, putting resources to help a project to bootstrap, to begin, when eventually the project becomes success, there's not a reward, there's not a distribution of the revenue, of this market revenue amongst the first contributors, which were really putting their resources. So this can be summarized in this last point. The commons-based pre-production approach doesn't have proper reinforcement mechanisms. So the latter is important in the sense of, because it is related with a lack of kind of a heavy and learning system for these community networks to enforce the connections which work well together, to reward the nodes which are providing useful value. So the thing is that if we don't have these rewards mechanisms, this kind of synaptical development, at the end we are losing well, I don't remember the word to say, we are losing the capacity to keep the nodes together, no? So basically, our argument is that the development of coordination mechanisms and proper infrastructures for sense-making, coordination, and collaboration within these value production communities, the development of these systems is essential to the achievement of a global brain technology or a global mind perspective, what we call the peer-to-peer paradigm of society. If we have this idea of self-organization with a global scale, we need to develop these coordination mechanisms. So, according to our former research, 2 key points that we should preserve in the development of this infrastructure is to keep both the structural decentralization and the functional diversity of the network. And this can be described easily in 2 words, basically propagation and innovation. If we have, the more diverse a network is in functional terms, the more innovative it can become, because if you allow agents with different cognitive capacities, with different nature, maybe an open cog implementation, or a micropsy, or a developer and a designer, and you put all these agents together, you have the potential to produce innovative value. But if you also don't have the proper propagation mechanisms, if you don't have a decentralized network, a distributed network, this value is not going to flow freely. So we're not going to have a resilient social organism. So in order to do that, we consider that we should follow three ways. We should develop a set of tools which basically consider these 3 points. On one hand, it should be distributed and open, so we have to preserve this peer-to-peer approach. It should allow interactions between agents with different nature, and this leads us to interoperability. For example, we need our Lochband for machine-to-human communication, or kind of an Esperanto, or basically a JSON, no, to connect the different plugins in this system. And it also has to implement mechanisms for reliability, such as reputation systems and transactions persistence. Basically, what this means is that we need trust in a network in which we don't have central control and central governance. We need mechanisms for peer governance. We need to allow the trust. We need the agents to know who is working with him. They need to know the reputation or the work which have been done by the other agents. So we need these reputation mechanisms. And accountability is important, and it's very related with the potential of blockchain, because at the end, the blockchain, it's just a public ledger mechanism. So a way to trust and to account the transactions and the actions of the agents within the network, it's essential. So I'll come back to Ishan. 1 second. Well, this is funny. Okay. Ishan?
Yeah, can you hear me again, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so what we've been looking to do is identify some of these components of the infrastructure that can support this type of collaboration and coordination among this group of heterogeneous distributed agents. So I'm just going to run through some of these different mechanisms and describe a little bit about them. First of all, what we have is an intention alignment. These are things like I want, I desire, you know, when people enter a project, what are they entering it for? It's very complex because some people don't know exactly what their intentions are. Maybe they're much more implicit than active. And so building a shared understanding is essential to be able to even get to the place where we can define goals. Values alignment. We also have to do some of that, and this emerges much in conversation and through different processes and practices, social processes and practices that we can design. Values alignment is challenging because, again, we're dealing with a lot of implicit knowledge, and we're having to coordinate the language that we use to even speak about our values, and what we care about, what we believe in, what's important to us. These are also constantly shifting. Our values are changing all the time, what we care about. And this extends to projects, right? I might get involved in a project because I'm looking for financial compensation, or I need to be financially stable. But I also may be in it, as is in the case in the open source community often, because of the passion to see the project happen. So maybe there's a social value that exists because of participation. So there's 2 aspects of value. One is the values that we hold and carry with us, and then there's the other that is the values that we'd like to see in return due to the value that we create within the network. Then, of course, we have capacity and skill sets. So what can these agents do together? What do they have what are their skills? What are their resources? Or what are they willing to do? Because sometimes we may have the skills, but there's maybe not the bandwidth or the willingness. And so that's an important input, especially as it relates to, of course, the outputs or projects that may emerge from the network. Sometimes you'll have great ideas within a network, but not the capacity to pull those ideas off or bring them into reality. So that's an important factor that we also, again, I think the common theme through all of these mechanisms is there's a lot of needing to make this knowledge explicit in order to sense make in the process. And so that's pretty essential, and that's also quite sensitive from a human or social perspective about eliciting this knowledge from the network, and what are the mechanisms even to elicit or to facilitate the conversations to occur in which implicit values, capacities, intentions can more accurately be made explicit. We also have a great need for fluid governance mechanisms. Diego touched on this a little bit, but how do decisions get made? Who makes them? What about inclusion and exclusion within decision-making, within the governance framework? Especially this is important when it relates to different skill sets and capacities and spheres of activity. So a particular project, say a software project or a hardware project for that matter, will have design, will have engineering, we'll have potentially sales or communication about the narrative of that. And so these are different spheres of activity that we want the agents that are most capable to execute in those spheres of activity to have the agency to be able to do so. So defining these frameworks is extremely important as it relates to effective governance and decision making. And just who does what and why and how. That feeds into reputation systems. Reputation systems, I won't just say reputation because I think reputation is very context sensitive. You may trust me to walk your dog, but not necessarily trust me to watch your house. So we need to understand the dimensions of reputation and trust that exist in different dimensions. This helps us to understand and establish patterns of behavior, which is incredibly important when we're dealing with, I'll say, mission critical parts of the project where you have to execute on different ideas. So that leads us into value accounting systems. We need to be able to track the types and levels of contribution that people are creating, the types of value, track and evaluate value creation. This is also quite complex because there's very many different ways that people create value. Sometimes it's the people who are just present and from a social perspective can really help create value, or can help create value within a group, although there may not be specific outputs that are oriented, that are clear. So again, implicit value, explicit value, it's a lot easier when you're working with quantitative values. But when you're working with very subjective qualitative values, those are difficult to quantify, and so we need mechanisms to be able to at least start exploring that. Sense-making mechanisms for conversation, ideation, brainstorming, argument and issue mapping, research. This is what one of the projects that's coming out of this MetaMaps is about. It's helping to create knowledge graphs for network communities. And finally, decision-making mechanisms. How we make what decisions and who makes them. So right now, this is a very manual process. We use various platforms and experiments for sense-making in this way. And what we consider, we consider these platforms to be the sense-making apparatus of the Open Value Network. So we use visual interfaces for mapping out networks of ideas, conversations, and projects. We practice sessions around defining values and intentions. And then what is the case is that naturally projects and initiatives emerge from this work. So we're developing systems and frameworks for governance and decision-making, as well as accounting for the types of value. We're just in the prototype phase of this. We have some initial frameworks for different governance mechanisms, for reputation, for value accounting. And we do not foresee this staying manual. There's much to be automated or made specific tools or interfaces for. So part of our journey is actually building these tools that we need to bootstrap ourselves and our own cognitive capacity as a social organism. I'll give a quick example. I have a dear friend, this is quite lateral, but a dear friend, an artist, who took all of the human-generated subjective categorizations of artwork from the Tate Moderns collection when they opened it up. He fed that into an algorithm, and using a particular syntax, created what he called machine-imagined artworks, descriptions of trillions of possible artworks that don't exist yet, but are potentially. He says at the end, he wonders whether the entire process could be automated. So the next slide, he says, it makes me wonder whether the whole process from generating an idea through to the actual production of the artwork could perhaps be automated. Maybe hook into a Thingiverse API and a 3D printer. Why are we sharing this? If we consider intelligent agents, sensors, and the Internet of Things, then we understand that not only are networks to include humans, but also include machine intelligence and capabilities, especially as it relates to self-assembling robots and 3D printers, etc. So through artificial general intelligence, can we potentially look at defining what these agents don't have in common, what they do have in common, and what the possibility space is? And can novel things emerge from that? So these intelligences are emerging. What we're dealing with, what we're looking to deal with, is the combined outputs of humans and machines working to create shared value through the value chain, and supported by an infrastructure designed to enable the emergence of novel and innovative ideas, frameworks, and projects. These may develop into a network that can operate at a higher cognitive capacity and as a distributed intelligence. So some future trajectories for this. We're just at the beginning of developing this OVN model. There's significant questions that we've gone over. But really what's very interesting is what we may simply need to facilitate the emergence of novel forms of distributed intelligence are the coordination mechanisms between agents that can help us explore this possibility space, where there's going to be this diversity of heterogeneous agents of different levels of cognitive capacity while using interoperable protocols and coordination infrastructure. So our question, and I'm almost finished here, our question is, how can the engineering and practices of artificial general intelligence plug into the OVN model, or the distributed collaborative organization model, in order to augment the sense-making capacity of these various developing communities of agents? What tools and infrastructure may support them, and what may emerge from that? So thank you very much. To close off, and all your agents are invited to come and create value with us in the Open Value Network. And we hope you do, and we're really happy to have this chance to present these ideas to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if you want to read something more detailed about the Open Value Network model, we will be releasing a website in 1.5 months. So if you're interested, you have to go to bitmind.co, scroll down and follow us on Twitter or subscribe to our mailing list. So thank you.
Yeah, Bitmind. So we're going to